Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Charter Institute of Linguists, event on upskilling to become a professional DPSI qualified interpreter, presented by Sue Leshen. My name is Nadine Prosper, and I'm the Events and Networks Manager. During this webinar, you can ask questions by posting them on the questions panel to the right of your screen. And then at the end of the presentation, we'll have approximately 15 minutes for the Q&A session. But for now, I'd like to welcome our speaker. Thank you so much for joining us today, Sue. How are you doing?
I'm great, thank you. I'm speaking from very, very cold Manchester. How are you?
I'm not too bad, and it's very cold down here in London as well. What I'll do, Sue, I'm just going to hand over to you so you can begin your presentation. You should have got a notification popping up on your end.
Yes, I've seen it. Can you see my first slide?
Yep, I can see your first slide, Sue.
Great, thanks very much. So welcome everybody to this presentation on upskilling to become a professionally qualified, DPSI qualified interpreter. Great to have you on board this afternoon. As Nadine said, I'm Sue Leshen. A little bit of information about me. I'm a fellow of the Chartered Institute of Linguists. I have Chartered Linguist Interpreter status. I'm a member of the CIOL, Chartered Institute of Linguists Council, which is the governing body, and also a member of their Interpreting Division Steering Group, and also of their Equality, Diversity and Inclusion Steering Group. I used to be a member of the Professional Conduct Committee of NRPSI, the National Register of Public Service Interpreters, but my term finished a little while ago. And I'm currently a member of the Professional Conduct Committee of the National Registers of Communication Professionals working with deaf and deafblind people, which is the sign language interpreters regulatory body. Like many of you out there listening today, I'm sure, I'm a public service interpreter. That's the bottom line there. My language is French. So there's my alter ego, Superwoman, I wish. And I'm going to put this over to you now. You've heard a little bit about me. I'm very interested to know some information about you. You can perhaps put some comments, if you like, in the chat. Where are you up to in terms of your interpreting experience? Perhaps you're somebody who's done some informal interpreting for friends and family. You may have some kind of formal community interpreting experience, or even a community interpreting qualification. And I've mentioned a community interpreting qualification there, the Level 3 certificate in community interpreting qualification, which is regulated by Ofqua. I'll say a little bit more about that later. Now, this is an entry-level standard which approximates really to A level for public service interpreting in health, mental health, social services type work. But do bear in mind, this is not a qualification that is regulated by the National Register of Public Service Interpreters, unlike the Level 6 qualification, the DPSI, which we're talking about today. Do bear in mind as well, please, that the CIOL certificate, that's Chartered Institute of Linguists, obviously, certificate in bilingual skills is a Level 3 qualification as well, but this is not an interpreting qualification. So why might you want to upskill? Not surprisingly, we all chase more money. You might want to earn more money. You might have decided that you want a professional interpreting qualification rather than just, interpreting on a sort of informal basis. You might have come to the conclusion that you'd be very interested in getting a public service interpreting qualification, and you may well want at this stage to enhance your professional reputation. Generally, obviously, qualifications such as a DPSI will help you do that in terms of your marketing, for your website and so on, your LinkedIn profile without a doubt. And for your self-respect as well, you want to stand out from bilinguals currently working in the interpreting market. You're better than that. You really want to say, look, this is who I am. I'm professionally qualified. And maybe you're already out there doing some kind of interpreting. For example, I do a fair bit of business interpreting, and you want to expand on your existing client base. You want, to perhaps get in more clients from a kind of different client base. Some of you may have worries about your lack of confidence if you're already interpreting in the public sector. And I know this happens because I'm out there myself interpreting. I'm mainly interpreting due to my legal background, I suppose, in legal venues. And I do come across people interpreting in courts and tribunals with no formal interpreting qualifications. And when we have a chat in the waiting room, they're quite often quite honest about, being worried about almost being found out, in terms of lack of qualifications, and knowing that they don't know the court procedure that they should know, they don't know the legal terminology that they should know. There are others, of course, who just sail into legal and other venues without any background knowledge, any qualifications, and so on. And unfortunately, this is happening as we speak. So what am I letting myself in for if I do decide to do a DPSI qualification? Well, as I've said, the standard of the examination is a high one. It's university level. It's what we call Ofqual level 6. Ofqual is a UK government regulator of examination standards. And my best advice to you here is don't underestimate the standard of this exam. It is not a walkover. I personally can speak from my own experience. I did underestimate it. I had done a little bit of interpreting before I sat the exam, and obviously with my legal background, I had a pretty extensive legal terminology basis. And I just was completely shocked by what a high standard this exam was, and how searching it was, and in terms of what it covered, what is expected of candidates. And it is not an exam that you can walk through on a wing and a prayer. It's very much the responsibility of the candidate to ensure that they are properly prepared. So do I need to do a course first, or can I just turn up on the day and sit the exam? Well, courses aren't compulsory, but I would definitely advise you to do a course, and preferably a good quality one. There are lots on the market there. Get recommendations before you sign up. Courses will significantly decrease the risk of failing all of the units in the exam, or maybe some of them. Because, of course, people do fail units from time to time. Anybody who tells you that you can just walk in on the day based on a bit of interpreting experience is lying. There are some exceptions where people have got quite a lot of interpreting experience in the background and maybe subject knowledge and so on, but most people don't have that. So you really need to think very hard, long and hard, about the time and the money investment risk if you just turn up and sit the exam. Have a look at the CIOL website for a list of DPSI course providers. I'm actually one of them. Do bear in mind that the CIOL does not recommend any particular course providers. It's just a list. Do I need to do this course first, or can I just turn up? Well, courses are obviously going to assist you with terminology preparation and glossary building. I personally help my mentees to prepare glossaries on, for example, the terminology to do with modern slavery. That's a big a big issue at the moment. We're interpreting a lot in that area, particularly for the Home Office. You know, perhaps in coercive control, in family law, a lot of us working in the family courts are coming across that kind of terminology. It's all about keeping up to date. Courses will help you with subject-specific reference material. You know, it might be that we might recommend some textbooks, we might recommend some sort of very useful books around the subject which aren't particularly, you know, difficult. You know, they're quite easy reading. For example, The Secret Barrister. I don't know if any of you have seen The Secret Barrister tweets, but there's a lot of really interesting terminology in their books and their tweets. And obviously, if you do a course, you'll get a lot of hands-on, oral and written exam practice, and this is invaluable in terms of, you know, familiarizing yourself with the exam format, the time constraints and so on. And also, good courses will give you some kind of background in ethical and professional conduct. I mean, I certainly do with my mentees. It's invaluable in terms of later work, you know, not to give advice, not to befriend, all that kind of thing. And courses will also give you good career progression advice. What can I do with my DPSI once I've got it? Where can I work? Which sort of agencies should I sign up with? Perhaps more importantly, which ones do you recommend that I avoid? Obviously, like everything else, there are good and bad agencies out there. So which languages are available for the DPSI exam? There's a very wide range of languages. You can check the list on the qualifications page on the CIOL website. I'll let you have a look at that in your own time. Which modes of interpreting are examined? Basically two, what we call consecutive and simultaneous. Simultaneous whispering, that is. Consecutive, this means that we interpret after the speaker has finished speaking. So the speaker is speaking, pause, and then the interpreter starts interpreting. Simultaneous whispering, interpreting at the same time as the speaker, and you will do that in the exam by sitting very close to the speaker, to the person you're interpreting for, and your other ear is sort of pointed in the direction of whoever is speaking. And during the exam, you're going to be switched from one mode to the other. When you hear the instruction, would you like to move? So does the exam cover both interpreting and translation? Well, yes, it does. Have a look at these units here. Units 1 and 2 and 3 cover different types of interpreting. We've got in Unit 1 the consecutive and simultaneous interpreting, Unit 2 the on-site translation. You're handed a document, a text, and you have to interpret it to the, or translate really, I suppose literally, to the listener, to and from English. And Units 4 and 5 are your written translation papers to and from English. More information needed about units, all of these units? Well, Unit 1 and 2 do test your basic linguistic skills. Unit 1 very much will test your interpersonal skills, you know, your command of the examination room, if you like. I always advise my mentees to walk in, you know, very confidently and, you know, professionally dressed with their notepad and their pen, you know, treat it like a real interpreting venue, and awareness of your responsibilities and your role. All this, you know, has to be conveyed during that unit. Units 2 and 3, similar, but here you're going to have to produce accurate and, you know, capable, competent translations of your on-site translations. Units 4 and 5, here we're looking for accurate and very comprehensible written translations. You know, I always advise mentees to read back what they've written during the exam and work out, does this actually make any sense? I mean, I proofread a lot of colleagues' work, and I have to say, I proofread all the sort of legal translation work, I should say, rather than other types. And, you know, I very regularly come across written translations that are just gobbledygook in parts. They do not make any sense, mainly because the colleague has not understood the legal terminology and the legal procedure that's being referred to. Do I have to sit all 5 units in one go? Well, no. You can take as many or as few as you feel comfortable with. The exam is held in June and November each year. As regards the English law exam, you can take some or all units in June and or November. As regards the other DPSI exams, you can take, if you like, all 5 units in June or take written units only in November. Now, in terms of making a decision about how many or how few units you sit, if you've got a course provider who you can talk to about this, or some kind of mentor, take their advice. You know, do you think I'm ready to sit all or some of them at any particular time? Also, some of you may have financial constraints, and it might be better to sort of pay as you go and do a few here and there rather than all at once. How long is allowed to complete all of the units? If you're registering this year, obviously for next year, you've got 3 years to successfully complete all of the units from the date you passed one or more of the units. If you've registered pre-2021, you've got 5 years. So what happens in the interpreting units? As I've said, consecutive and simultaneous interpreting modes are examined. You have role plays into and out of English and on-site oral translations into and out of English. So quite a lot is going on in those units. What happens specifically in the interpreting role plays? Here you've got 2 interlocutors, if you like, 2 speakers, who are reading from pre-prepared scripts that they've got in front of them. You, the candidate, cannot see them. You're going to interpret as required, consecutively and simultaneously. The role plays are based around 2 different subjects or topics, and the role plays are in English and in the other language. And very fortunately here, this gives you a bit of a lift up, the role play subject matter is notified about 2 weeks before the exam. So that's got to be really helpful. What are the expectations as regards to the interpreting units? That is to say, the expectations that the examiner has of the candidate. They are that the candidate will interpret accurately and fully. Now, this is really important in terms of future careers as public service interpreters, because this is what is expected of us when we are at real live venues. We are not supposed to précis or give a resumes, synopsis of what we've just heard, you know, as we wish. We are required to interpret what we have heard and no less. We have to impress with a professional and confident manner, just as we would if we walked into a hospital or a local government office. We need to be able to show an objective understanding of cultures and conventions related to both languages. You know, we might have to make what's called a cultural intervention, and I do this quite regularly in my interpreting work. For example, I might have to explain in the exam or in my real life work to the court that in my client's culture, when they're referring to brother, bearing in mind my language is French, frère might mean blood relative, might mean a cousin, it might mean a friend, and in a particular context it might be a religious brother, you know. Because otherwise the court and the lawyers and so on around us, working with us, may miss this, and mistakes can be made, which can haunt a client throughout the rest of their case. Ask for clarification if appropriate. You know, we may ask a question such as, can you just tell me what that abbreviation that you've just mentioned means? Now, obviously, you're going to be able to do that in the consecutive part of the examination where there is a pause for you, the interpreter, to speak. But if you're interpreting simultaneously, you know, at the same time as the speaker, that's not going to be possible. So what happens in the on-site translation? Here, you're going to be in a waiting room for a few minutes where you are going to be handed a text that you've never seen before, and you're going to be asked to prepare it. You are not allowed any access to dictionaries or glossaries of any sort, and you are then going to be invited to go into the examination room and deliver an on-site oral translation. So with that text in your hand, you're just going to stand there in front of the examiner and translate from top to bottom of that document. So what happens in the written translation units? Here, as I've said before, they are from and to English. Approximately 250 words need translating. Here, you can use hard copy only, not electronic reference material, and you can use your hard copy dictionaries and glossaries. Hence, so important to prepare in advance for this exam. Have your glossaries at your fingertips next to you. You know, if the exam topic is, for example, as it was recently, I think the local government examination, the most recent one was around the subject of tenants and repairs to properties. You know, you should have a glossary all about not just repairs, but landlord and tenant generally. You know, it is certain subjects, if you do a real sort of coverage of the kind of topics that come up year in, year out, there is some kind of favoritism, if you like, of certain topics coming up fairly regularly. Again, for the written part of the exam, there is a requirement for accuracy, not surprising. You know, if you have a client in later life and your translation is off-piste, shall we say, they're not going to be very pleased. Some of them might even ask for or tell you that they're going to reduce your rates and so on. So this is preparation really for real life. So completion of the task is required. Not all candidates do seem to manage to finish the written part of the exam. Some of them, some candidates will, you know, spend too long doing a sort of rough draft and then run out of time to prepare, you know, a fairer copy, a better copy, and so on. Or part of the examination topic may defeat them. They just don't know the terminology and so on. But the aim really should be to complete if possible. Can you do the exam online? Yes, at the CIOLQ Virtual Centre. Have a look at the website and you will see that there is a link there for an online demo test to help you to familiarise yourself with the sort of software available on the CIOL site. And I was a bit dubious at first about examinations online, being online. But, you know, the more I've thought about it, really, this is good preparation for real life interpreting as well, because more and more since the pandemic, including in the arena of public service interpreting, we are finding ourselves interpreting online pretty regularly. You know, even entire court hearings are being interpreted online. Or, you know, for example, a conference with a barrister. I did one the other day. For example, barrister was in a rural location with a very poor internet connection. Judge was in court. Client was actually, unfortunately, on a mobile phone connection, which wasn't great. But you know, this is how we're working these days. So you can have a look at the list of centres where you can go and sit the exam. You can actually go in person and sit the exam. Again, CIOL doesn't necessarily recommend any above any of the others, but you know, they are all available for you to check out. Most people would attend one that is in their neighbourhood, if you like, so that you don't have to travel too far. So who's eligible to register for the DPSI exam? Basically, any CIOL members in any of the categories listed there: affiliates, career affiliates, associates, members. One prerequisite is that there is a certain degree of proficiency in both English and in the target language, and that is for obvious reasons. I mean, we don't want to be putting interpreters into the public services who've got very weak English, for example, or whose target language is not up to scratch, because you know, this is about interpreting for real people. It's, you know, with real issues and so on. Do note that if you are a CIOL member, this is good in the sense that not only are you eligible to apply for the exam, but you're going to get free access to past exam papers and to examiners' reports. Examiners' reports are really useful reading because, you know, they set out why you know, certain parts of the exam have been problematic for certain candidates, and how many have, you know, handled bits and pieces well, what were the difficult bits and so on, what they're looking for in terms of quality and standards and so on. How much does the DPSI exam cost? I talked earlier about the investment risk, but you know, at the end of the day, okay, this is looking like quite a lot of money, because you have to pay a fee for each unit that you sit, and on top of that, an exam centre fee for the exam centre you've chosen. So on my calculations, I'd say it's going to cost you around, at current figures, around £800 if you take all 5 units. But as I've said, you might decide perhaps to stagger the cost and, you know, take a few units here and a few units there. This does all seem like an awful lot of money, and yes, it is, but you have to think in terms of investment in your future career. If you're quite happy to stay where you are now and never you know, take your interpreting career further, that's fine. But you know, if you want to try and work for better agencies and so on, attract higher rates of pay, you know, be treated as a professional people have qualifications, then you know, this is the kind of outlay that you need to make. But you know, within a year, you know, we're all out working all the time. You can do as much as or as little as you like. You will easily recoup that figure if you work hard, that is. So what are the 3 what are called pathways, DPSI pathways? Well, basically, you can choose whether or not to do an exam in law or local government or health. You could actually choose to do all of them, or maybe 2 of them, or just 1 of them. I would certainly advise you to do 1 of them and make sure you pass all that, and then take another one if that's what you want to do at a later stage. I think cognitive overload and so on, and financial considerations would dictate that taking 2 or all 3 at once might just be a little too stressful. So DPSI law pathway, we'll kick off with this one, literally. Here, depending on where you're geographically based, you're going to choose to study the English and Welsh legal system, or the Scottish system, which obviously is different from that of England and Wales, quite substantially actually. Or if you're based in Northern Ireland, the Northern Irish system. The Northern Irish system is different to some extent, but not as much as the Scottish system is, if we're talking about comparisons with the legal system in England and Wales. This is the legal system that I mentor, that is to say, that of England and Wales. So if you've got a DPSI law qualification, where can you work? Well, any legal venue really, courts, tribunals, police stations, solicitors' offices, barristers' chambers, prisons, Home Office, lots and lots of work still coming out of the Home Office, and for obvious reasons, which in the news at the moment, isn't it? This immigration is a hot topic, no end of work there. Local government pathway, you could find yourself interpreting for housing departments, homelessness, housing benefits, and so on. I'll never forget once interpreting in the housing department. Well, I was sitting in the waiting room actually for ages, and there's just myself and a gentleman with a briefcase waiting, and I was getting a bit annoyed because my client just didn't show up. It was an interview to do with homelessness, and it was only after about half an hour that the receptionist called me through to the reception desk and said, you know, your client is the gentleman sitting opposite you with the briefcase, you know, the one wearing the pinstripe suit. So that was a big interpreting lesson for me, that homeless people aren't necessarily just beggars and street homeless individuals. So you might find yourself interpreting for the housing department, social services department, lots of work there at the moment, unaccompanied minor asylum seeking children and so on, education department, school exclusions, and so on. Very, very interesting work. Health, I started off initially doing some work in hospitals and so on, and decided after a while it wasn't for me, but it may be something that's of interest to you. You might be quite keen to work in clinics, health centres. Bear in mind as well that if you've got a DPSI health qualification, you will most of the time be working in the NHS, but you may also find yourself interpreting in some very smart private medical venues. I was quite shocked to find myself doing that on a few occasions, and what had happened was, due to the NHS being, you know, virtually at a standstill at times because it's so overloaded, what they do is outsource some operations and treatments to private clinics, and so I was actually booked to interpret in some very swish upmarket private facilities, you know, the sort of private clinics where they bring you coffee on a tray, which is all very welcome. You don't get that in the NHS. So why you should do the DPSI exam. Now, I can hear some of you saying, oh, you know, it's going to cost me too much money, I can't afford it. I can understand that in a way, but my response to that really is you can't afford not to, because you know, if you do it, you're going to almost certainly increase your earning capacity and your income. Some of you may well be saying, well, I don't really need to do it because, you know, what the hell, if you like, I can still get jobs even though I haven't got a DPSI qualification. And my response to that would be, well, yes, okay, but usually only at the lower end of the market and usually less well-paid jobs. Some of you may say, well, I don't need to do an exam because, you know, I can learn on the job. But here, I would ask you to really consider, are you learning the right way of doing things if you're just learning on the job? If you've done a course to help you prepare for the exam, you would have been taught best practice. And if what you're doing actually out there at the moment is learning on the job, at whose expense? Basically, it's at the client's expense, isn't it? Because if you mess up, who's going to lose out? It's going to be your client. And remember, when we interpret in public services, many of our clients are very, very vulnerable people. Your client could be sent to prison because you've messed up on a technicality. There's a very infamous case of an interpreter who, instead of interpreting that the abusive mother shook the baby, actually interpreted that the mother was rocking the baby, or vice versa, I forget, but anyway, it was wrong. So it's, you know, it's really worrying. You could be in an immigration appeal tribunal and you mess up there on some terminology, or you've got your facts wrong, or something you've called the asylum seeker, the appellant's cousin, his brother, when it wasn't. It was actually his friend's sister's husband or something like that. And then the whole issue of credibility comes up, and, you know, bit by bit, you know, the Home Office destroy the case, and basically you've caused the doubt. You know, end of the line, that client could be deported. If you're in the health arena, what if you get the diagnosis wrong and you convey an incorrect one? Well, that could have all sorts of repercussions, obviously, in terms of treatment, medication, and so on. So the advantages of doing the DPSI exam are clearly that you're going to enhance your own professional status and recognition amongst your colleagues, certainly for your clients. Think marketing, this is so important these days, and branding and so on. What kind of image are you trying to put out there? You know, if you've got a DPSI, you can put this after your name in all your marketing material, your website, put it on your business cards. A lot of us these days have got brochures that we give out detailing our services. You can put it there, put it on your LinkedIn profile. Whenever you put posts out there on social media, Instagram and so on, you might just put DPSI after your name if you want to. And obviously, if you've got a DPSI, it's going to be nationally recognised because it's an Ofqual accredited qualification. So, you know, all good agencies, also, you know, providers of work are going to know about it. Some of them actually have higher rates, quite a few of them do, for DPSI qualified interpreters compared to bilinguals who also happen to be on their books. And if you are interested in sitting the Diploma in Police Interpreting examination, some of you might be if you're sort of keen on working more or less exclusively for the police, having a DPSI will entitle you to some exemptions on that exam. So some more advantages of DPSI are that you can apply to register on the National Register of Public Service Interpreters. And this is a fantastic register. I'm on it, been on it for several years. And this is a register that is searched, it's used by numerous work providers out there. You know, it's a sort of central reference point, really. I need an interpreter, I need one tomorrow, I need one who's got, you know, a background in health or whatever, who's been properly, whose qualifications have been properly checked, security vetted, and so on. So I'm going to check the National Register. Sometimes when the courts, for example, can't secure interpreters through the companies to whom the MOJ has outsourced work, they will find us via the National Register. I'm quite often contacted by the Crown Prosecution Service, actually, because they've seen my name on the National Register. The National Register does reassure certain clients, you know, the sort of better quality clients, because they know that, you know, you couldn't be on that register if there was anything to worry about you. Some of you may have heard of the Association of Police and Court Interpreters, and I'm a member of this association. This is again very good to have in your marketing material. It's a sort of sign of your professionalism, and when they interview prospective members, they do look to see whether or not you are a member of the NRPSI. So what having a DPSI qualification says about you is that it's saying that you are committed to protecting the public, and that this is very, very important, that you are committed to protecting the profession, because it's not just about you and me, it's about the profession of which we are part. We do not want to undermine it, we want to support it. That you as an individual want to be treated as a professional. You're not just a bilingual out there who maybe learned Spanish at night school or something. You know, you have professional standing. And of course, bottom line, and perhaps most important of all, really, that we as professionally qualified interpreters uphold professional standards. You can trust us, you can have faith in us, confidence in us. So it also says that we're competent, that we're accountable for our work, that we are taking responsibility for our own career development, that we can stand out in an industry which, let's be honest, and we all know this is going on, often uses bilinguals when really they should be using interpreters. And bottom line, but probably should be top line, we are committed to protecting very often vulnerable service users. You know, maybe people with mental health problems, maybe children, maybe modern slaves, whatever, you know, these are vulnerable clients without a doubt. So what if you don't bother having doing the DPSI exam? Well, clearly there's a lack of professional status and recognition, career stagnation, but maybe that's what some of you want. You don't want to progress your careers, but I think that's a shame. And you may well find yourself competing with, you probably will do, with DPSI qualified colleagues for jobs. And I would ask you, where's your self-respect? And okay, if you're not bothered about that, what about respect for others, i.e. your clients? So if you don't bother doing the DPSI law exam I'm talking about here, have a read of this. This is a statement by Baroness Cousins, who's very, very supportive of public service interpreters. And she made this statement in the House of Lords this year in September. And she said that there is a consensus among the specialised professional bodies that the diploma in public service interpreting at level 6 should be, and this is the important bit, the minimum standard for any court interpreting work. And this consensus is supported by the National Register of Public Service Interpreters, the Chartered Institute of Linguists, and the Association of Court and Police Interpreters. And that statement is fantastic, and it doesn't leave any room for doubt. So if you don't bother doing the DPSI exam, I'm still pressing my point home here, I'm going to tell you a few horror stories. These are the tragic cases of Begum, Victoria Klimby and Daniel Pelga. These are quite upsetting, I'm just warning you now. Begum, back in 1981, this was the case that involved a woman who had suffered continuous domestic abuse over many years. and she was convicted of murdering her husband and sentenced to life imprisonment. It was discovered a lot later that actually she hadn't understood most of what was said at her trial, because the inverted commas interpreter used by the court was actually an accountant, would you believe? I mean, frankly, it beggars belief, but he couldn't even speak her dialect. Can't get much worse than that. In 1985, the Court of Appeal said, "It is beyond the understanding of this court that it did not occur to someone that the reason for her silence was because she was being spoken to in a language, she was not being spoken to in a language which she understood." And they actually changed the conviction down to manslaughter. Finally, this woman was released after having spent 4 years in prison, but very sadly, her family ostracized her, didn't want to know, and this lady committed suicide a few years later. Next horror story, the very tragic case of this little girl, Victoria Climby. It was actually recently the 30th anniversary of her death. You may have seen that on social media. A lot of us picked it up. This child died back in 2000, the year 2000. She was only 7. She died as a result of abuse. And her great aunt, who's called Marie-Thérèse Garot, had been used by the public services to interpret for Victoria, whose first language was not English. Amazingly, this is incredible, this child was never interviewed on her own with the benefit of a professional, independent, that's the important word there, interpreter. And Carol was subsequently jointly convicted. I think she was actually convicted with her partner of having caused Victoria's death. Now, that is just horrendous. And what is really sad as well is that this child's parents sent her to the UK for a better life and to be educated in England. Another horror story, very sad case of this little boy, Daniel Pelka, a little Polish boy. He died in 2012, aged only 5 years, due to abuse by his own mother and stepfather. And this was yet another case where the public services used family members to interpret instead of independent professional interpreters. So what's stopping you? Get going. Those of you who are considering the DPSI exam and register, you can register online on the CIOL website for the June 2022 exam. You can do that as from January. Just to wrap up, bit of information about resources. Have a look at the DPSI handbook. There's a link to that on the CIOL website, and the kind of assessment criteria there is quite interesting, where the examiners are saying this sort of thing: the candidate has conveyed information with complete accuracy, has an adequate command of vocabulary, is showing a knowledge of intercultural differences. This is the kind of thing they're looking for. You will also, if you're considering the DPSI law exam, find a list of legal topics in the DPSI handbook, very extensive list actually. One or more of these topics may come up. There's no guarantees obviously as to which topics will come up. What I do tend to notice is that the exams very much reflect contemporary issues. Like recently there was the paper on coercive control in family law. That's very much in the news these days, sort of mental cruelty used by one spouse against another, to isolate them and so on. And as I said earlier, role play topics are notified about 2 weeks before the exam, so that's very helpful. Here's just a selection of some of the legal topics for DPSI law that you'll see on the list of such topics in the handbook. Following offences come up pretty regularly in the exam: dishonesty, violence, property offences, sexual offences, road traffic offences. Actually, I think road traffic came up in the last exam. Do have a look at the past examination papers. As I've said, you can get them free if you have affiliate or higher level membership status. If you're not a CIOR member, don't know why you're not, but if you're not, you'll have to pay a reasonable fee for them. And these past papers do provide really useful indicators as to the sort of standard and the format of the exam, and also as to the type of role play subjects and scenarios that crop up. Have a look at the written markers reports. You can get them free again from CIOL if you've got affiliate or higher level membership. If you're not a CIOL member, you can pay a small fee to get them, and these are worth reading because they contain very useful information about candidates' overall performances, and in relation to certain parts of exams and so on, and where they've noticed particular strengths and weaknesses. Maybe it was around an abbreviation, or I think I saw in the recent one candidates struggled with the word fringe, fringe activity or something like that. So here's a typical Marcus comment: candidate has inadequate grounding in the target language, terminology and culture. And if any of you don't recognize the photo, it's from a very good film, Lost in Translation. Reading, have a look at this book. This is a book Junning by Junning Kirk, forgive my pronunciation, any Mandarin speakers out there. She was I think she still is, a Chinese Mandarin public service interpreter, came to the UK, and she wrote this book called Land of Hope. Actually, there's a trilogy all about her experiences of being a public service interpreter. And it's quite interesting because when she's writing it, it's coming up to around the time when the Ministry of Justice outsourced most of our public service interpreting work. And you can see the effects on her as a professional and also as a person as this is beginning to hit her life. More recently, there's been a very, very good broadcast on BBC Radio 4 this year called Voice for the Voiceless. And this is a public service interpreter talking about some of the cases that he's worked on and is working on, and confidentiality issues and trauma. That we're all of us in the public services are regularly feeling fairly traumatized by what we're hearing and seeing. It goes with the territory, really, but there it is. But get it on iPlayer or similar. It would give you a real bird's eye view of what we do. If again you're interested in DPSI law, there's a set of 5 preparatory webinars explaining legal terminology relating to certain offences, as mentioned, that come up fairly often in the DPSI examinations, so they're really worth having a look at. I know they are because I prepared them. And mentoring, always a good idea. CIOL have a free mentoring platform whereby you, the mentee, can choose your preferred mentor. So, this might be an area where you can get some help from somebody who's been there before you. Here's my contact details if anybody would like to talk to me about the exam, particularly DPSI law and DPSI local government, because those are the ones that I particularly mentor in. So thanks for listening. Hope you found that useful. And over to you for questions, and I'll try to answer them.
Thank you so much, Sue, for your presentation. We've had quite a lot of questions that have come through, so I'm going to try and get through as much as I can as possible. So with this question, it's popped up quite a few times. So this question is about whether or not you can bring dictionaries into the exam room.
Yes, I did mention this in the presentation. In terms of the written papers, yes, you can. You can bring hard copy dictionaries and your own glossaries. Remember, I've advised you to prepare your own glossaries, your list of terms, you know, as many glossaries as you can get together before the exam, all going to be very useful. But in terms of the actual interpreting parts of the exam, that's to say the consecutive and the simultaneous and the on-site parts of the exam, no, you can't bring dictionaries and glossaries in with you. And that's actually for a very good reason, because when you're actually in full interpreting flow, you're not going to have time to you know, look at a dictionary or a glossary. In real life, you know, we wouldn't either. The only way in which we would be, you know, if there was a break in the interpreting session, or we were working with a partner, you know, so 20 minutes on, 20 minutes off, or something like that.
Okay, moving on to the next question. So the next question is, what is the real practical preparation experience needed before the exam?
I would say, in terms of practical preparation experience, you know yourself how much or how little interpreting experience you've had. And if you have a mentor, you're on a course, you know, do ask for really honest feedback about what the course provider or the mentor thinks in terms of, you know, getting you more interpreting practice. I'm a great believer myself in taking my mentees to where I'm allowed to, that is, to my interpreting assignments. You know, if they live in the same area as me, which actually is Manchester, but you know, I've taken a lot of mentees to court and tribunals and so on, and they find that very useful. They learn a lot by doing that. Some mentees may well need more practice in certain areas than others. For example, maybe they need to really brush up their written English. Maybe their interpreting is absolutely fantastic, but it's the written English part of the exam that's letting them down. And when I pick that up with my mentees, what I'll say to them is, right, from now on, you know, with their agreement, of course, let's do 2 or 3 you know, written assignments a week, you know, to nail this, because that's your weak area.
Okay, moving on to our next question. Some feedback here, just saying thank you so much, Sue, for another excellent webinar. And then the question is, given the outsourcing by the Mojo to big agencies, is it worth investing in this qualification? Is there still enough work via the NRPSI?
I think that it's definitely still worth investing in this qualification, and that's one of the reasons that why I've presented it today, because I do firmly believe that there is definitely still enough work out there. You know, you need to sign up with a few agencies. I've probably got myself signed up with about 10. Obviously, since outsourcing in 2012, there is one major agency which has had the benefit of the contract, but that is not to say that other agencies, for example, don't have PSI work, MOJ type work. Yes, they do. You know, where, for example, they want you to go and sit in and monitor the court interpreter, that kind of thing. They want you to attend their firm, their solicitor's firm, to help prepare witness statements. Sometimes, as I mentioned during the presentation, when the outsourcing agency, the MOJ outsourcing agency, can't place an interpreter can't fill a job, then, you know, they start touting around the interpreters on the NRPSI register. And I think that's still quite common, actually. It's still happening. I got in the last month, I think I've had 2, maybe 3 calls because of that. So yeah, there's a lot of work. There's still, of course, a lot of home office work. So, you know, without a doubt, there's masses of PSI work out there. It's never going to go away. Where I think you have to be careful is to make sure you get paid a reasonable rate for the job, and that may not always be possible depending on the agency involved. But you know, when I'm being booked to do PSI legal work, I'm looking personally for around between £25 per hour and £30 an hour, and I'm trying most of the time to get a 2-hour minimum rate. You can get it, you know, you can.
Okay, moving on to our next question. What is the duration of each examination for the 5 units?
Oh gosh, let's start with the on-site papers. This is where you do on-site translation or interpreting. 15 minutes for each. Remember, you're going into and out of English, so not very long, really. It's over in a flash. Written paper, roughly about an hour to and from English. And the interpreting role play part of the exam, roughly about an hour again. When I sat my papers, my parts of the exam, I was quite lucky because they weren't all on the same day, which made it much more bearable.
Okay, just going to move on to our next question. Again, some feedback, just saying thank you again, Sue, for the informative session. And then the question is, would you please indicate if the qualification is recognised outside of England and the UK?
That's a very interesting question. I'm not sure why that's being asked. That would be interesting to know. But I think if you were being asked that question, it would be because somebody was wanting to offer you work. So, you know, again, I think it would be useful to explain that this is the qualification for working in the public services in England, that it's Ofqual, you know, recognised and regulated and so on. You know, so it's a very recognised qualification over here. You know, it's a sort of hallmark of quality. It shows a certain standard. You know, so you know, if you were touting, if you like, for work, interpreting work in the public services, perhaps in Europe, for example, you know, it would be probably quite useful to be able to say, you know, I do have this qualification, and to be able to refer them to, you know, for example, your profile on the NRPSI register, that kind of thing. You know, it would just be a sort of indicator of quality, really. I mean, even if they'd never heard of it before, by the time you've, you know, done all that, then they should be, you know, fairly impressed compared to perhaps some other interpreter who does not have that qualification at all, or has a, you know, a lesser sort of lesser level, perhaps community interpreting qualification.
Okay, going to move on to our next question. Somebody's actually asked, would you mind going back to the slide that's got your contact details on? They wanted to take your email address.
Oh, yes. Okay, I'll have a go. There you go. It's se.leshan15@gmail.com.
Okay, I'm going to move on to the next question. How many hours do the DPSI courses typically run for, and are they currently running only online, or are they doing it in person?
DPSI courses are very different. My particular one, I do it just at the moment on Skype, and some of my mentees contact me by telephone, and we do some work on email. Others are very similar these days, and I think this is very related to the pandemic. Some courses are face-to-face, where you can sign up for a certain amount of weeks and pay a lump sum. Some you pay as you go, like you do with mine, for example. You know, they come in all shapes and sizes. With some of the college-based courses, you would be signing up, you know, for a term of work on the whole and paying a lump sum. Whereas with other providers such as myself, you know, you pay, as I say, on a pay-as-you-go basis, which obviously helps spread the cost. And it's also very much targeted at how many sessions you need or you don't need. You know, it's targeted at the individual, whereas the college style courses tend to be much more targeted at the, you know, the group as a whole, so not necessarily appropriate to you know, individual candidates. You know, not all candidates obviously are the same. You know, so some are very good, others are quite weak, you know, have different sort of levels of competency and so on.
Okay.
I think one of the best things you can do actually is have a look at the COL course provider information and see if you can get any recommendations, and also, you know, just ring up some of the phone numbers and ask the sort of questions you want to ask. You know, and you will find quite a variation in what's on offer. I don't know if any of you have heard of the Interpreting Academy newsletter, which has just come out recently, and in that you can contact me on my email address and I can send you the details if you like. But in that newsletter there is quite an interesting section of it dedicated to courses for DPSI, and quite a lot of detail.
Okay, this will actually have to be our final question. So the question is, could you make a comment about the difference between being a professionally qualified interpreter through an MA versus the DPSI specific pathway, please?
Okay, the DPSI qualification is specifically to equip those interpreters who are wanting to work in the public services, okay, either in the legal venues, the local government venues, or the health venues, or a mixture of all of those three. If you take an MA in translation and interpreting, because it's usually a mixed MA, you, for example, I know London Met offers a course in the DPSI, preparation for the DPSI exam, as part of its MA, you know, so that might be something that you cover, as well as, for example, translation and conference interpreting. You know, and in some ways that might be a good idea actually, because then you would have more information about other types of interpreting, including, for example, business interpreting. It really depends on where you think you're going with your career, on your finances. You know, if you absolutely really don't want to do translation, then there would be absolutely no point doing an MA in translation and interpreting, for example. If, like me, you're somebody who does quite a lot of business interpreting, but also really enjoys and does a fair bit of public service interpreting, yeah, I mean, it might be worth doing the MA in translation and interpreting as well. If you're just absolutely focused on your DPSI, on your public service interpreting, then I think head in the direction of just your DPSI, and possibly consider the diploma in police interpreting. Quite a lot of colleagues are interested in that. you know, but as I say, that's very specific interpreting in terms of working for the police.
Okay, thank you so much, Sue. I mean, your presentation has been absolutely fantastic. Before we do close the webinar, was there any final words or anything you wanted to add?
I'd just like to know when you're going to sign up.
I think it's a nice way to finish, actually. But I mean, thank you again, Sue, anyway, for your presentation. I mean, I'm sure many of our listeners have learnt some useful tips today. So before I do close the webinar, I'd just like to remind you all that your certificate and a link to the recording will be emailed within 3 working days. COL members, please don't forget to log this webinar as your CPD activity on My CPD. And lastly, we do have an interesting programs of webinars already lined up. So please look out on our website for further details. I'm now going to close the webinar. Many thanks for listening, and I hope you all have a lovely weekend.
Thank you, Nadine.